Okay, so I want to talk about Steven Spielberg's Disclosure Day. This just came out. For like a year and a half, this was being called Spielberg's UFO movie. So we always knew it was going to be a big sci-fi movie. You know, that was the big pitch. Spielberg, Aliens. It was coming out June 12th, a big summer blockbuster, splash release date. And look, I grew up seeing Spielberg movies in theaters. Lincoln was the first one I caught on the big screen in 2012. Then Bridge of Spies, the BFG, The Post, Ready Player One, West Side Story, The Fabelmans. That is my pipeline of Spielberg. So going into this, I was excited in a way that felt personal. Like, this is the guy. This is a real blockbuster from Spielberg, who basically invented what a blockbuster is supposed to feel like. He invented the PG-13 ratings after Gremlins and Indiana Jones' Temple of Doom. Like, respectfully, when I was a kid and I saw those movies, I was like, how the fuck are these PG? And Disclosure Day is really good. I want to be clear about that. It's a really well-made, really fun movie. But I also want to push back a little on the recency bias going around, because every time Spielberg drops something, or anytime a big filmmaker releases a movie, people act like it's one of the greatest films ever made. This is not that. This is more in the tier of Munich, West Side Story, maybe War Horse, movies made with extraordinary craft, great formal craft, but they're not quite masterpieces, and I think that's okay. So let's talk about what the movie is actually about. The film is set in 2026, in the current year, with the world on the brink of World War III. Tensions with North Korea are escalating. The U.S. is at DEFCON 2. It's a whole thing. Into this chaos enters Daniel Kellner, played by Josh O'Connor, a cybersecurity specialist who steals a piece of alien technology and classified files from the Wardex Corporation. Files that document alien contact stretching all the way back to the Roswell incident. Wardex brands him a spy. A manhunt begins. He goes into hiding at a convent with his girlfriend, Jane Blankenship, played by Eve Hewson. Meanwhile, in Kansas City, a cardinal bird enters Margaret Fairchild's home. She's played by Emily Blunt, and it awakens her latent psychic abilities. She can sense others' thoughts and emotions, and she unconsciously starts speaking an unknown language during a live weather broadcast. This was in the trailer. That was, really what got me hooked into seeing this movie. So Wardex identifies this language as extraterrestrial. She gets hospitalized, forced into hiding, and that's where she and Daniel's worlds start colliding. Then you've got Colin Firth as Noah Scanlon, the head of Wardex, who is the villain of the piece, albeit one who believes he's acting in the country's best interests. That's like one of the typical Spielberg villains. He's a bad guy, but he's not so bad. He's not evil. There's obviously a reason why he's doing what he's doing, which is a bit boring. I don't know. And Coleman Domingo plays Hugo Wakefield. He functions basically as the Morpheus of the whole disclosure operation. He's clearly known about Margaret and Daniel all along, and the movie slowly reveals why. By the way, we're going to get into spoiler territory, so if you want to avoid major spoilers, you can shut the review when we get there. The third act reveal is where it gets compelling. We find out Daniel and Margaret weren't random targets. They were both abducted as children in 1996 by the aliens to serve as translators for this exact moment of worldwide disclosure, what the film calls passengers. Margaret developed emotional telepathy, the ability to see a person's life story in their eyes, making her the perfect vessel to broadcast the feeling of the message. Daniel developed the ability to understand extraterrestrial mathematics and language. They were two halves of a single communication device designed decades ago to help the aliens speak to humanity. They break into Margaret's old television studio to execute a global broadcast. Scanlon tries to cut the feed by disabling the local power grid, but Jane arrives just in time with the stolen alien device, which Margaret uses to jumpstart the station's electricity. The transmission reaches the entire planet, presenting undeniable evidence of alien encounters and decades of government cover-up, including the torture of alien captives. Then Hugo's team wheels out a living, breathing extraterrestrial referred to as In Vivo 17, who has a message. The alien whispers to Daniel, who whispers to Margaret, and the film cuts to black after she says one word: listen. So that's basically the movie in a nutshell. This is Spielberg doing what Spielberg does best, better than basically anyone alive. The chase sequences are thrilling. Well-worn ideas like car chases and clutch or armrest train jumps become renewed in his hands. There's a behind-the-scenes shot that went around online of Spielberg personally filming a drone shot of the car chase through the barn. And, it's very nice. You see him smile, you see him, making the shot. It's a really cool shot. But yeah, his energy is all over the movie, the sense that actual filmmakers care about every frame, which is important. This isn't superhero slop like Masters of the Universe, I saw June 3rd, and I remember thinking, like, every shot in that was extremely ugly. Even from, a cool, this is the epic shot point of view, everything looked CG and rendered. There are a lot of great practical chases here, the car chases, the train stuff. Seeing Spielberg actually filming that and having a blast filming it really made me happy, because I was happy watching the movie. It's really well done, old-fashioned chase stuff. The cast is excellent. Josh O'Connor, coming off Challengers and Knives Out 3, is really well cast here as a kind of Edward Snowden figure. Smart, wiry, running scared. Emily Blunt is doing great work here. She's one of the hearts of the film. As with all the best Spielberg work, she brings that human drama channeled in deeply felt performance from her. And also Josh O'Connor. The scene where Margaret, affected by her alien link, starts speaking extraterrestrial language during a live weather broadcast. And the movie partly, plays it for laughs. That's Spielberg at his most comfortable, blending wonder with comedy without tripping into full parody, the way a Marvel movie might. For the scene where Margaret speaks an alien language on camera, Blunt used her vocal training to create a distinct set of vocalizations and perform them in a single 4-minute long take, which is very impressive. And John Williams' score is doing exactly what a great Williams score should do. Williams himself said, "This time I'm going to write music not to lead the film, I'm going to write music under the film to give it the slight nudge forward." And you can feel that. It's less operatic than his classic Spielberg work, more restrained, but it has this great jazzy undercurrent whenever, Firth's villain enters a scene. I also want to say, I saw this in 70mm opening night, and it looks extraordinary. Cinematographer Janis Kaminski shot this film predominantly on 35mm using anamorphic lenses for a 2:39 aspect ratio. It's a movie that looks incredible. There's great camera work, very dynamic, fluid camera work. The chase scenes, some of them use handheld shots. You have wide shots of the car chases and the train scenes, where the camera takes a wide lens. And then even a scene like where you're revealing aliens for the first time on a laptop, which could be so boring. In Spielberg's hands, it's not, because he'll flip the camera as we're slowly zooming into this laptop screen and we're seeing what's on screen. There's just always something unique happening. Even the opening shot, which is at a wrestling scene, they were actually filming this in Huntington, New York a year ago. And I remember when they were filming this and I was like, I wonder what scene will, need wrestling characters in a Spielberg UFO movie. At the time, it was just Spielberg UFO movie. But the first shot is a first-person perspective of a wrestler punching a guy in the face. And this is all just set up so we could see that there's some information exchange at a wrestling match. Like one of those drop the bag. You have to watch the movie to get it, but it's such a good opening that does so much impressive camera work for a scene that doesn't even matter crucially to the plot. That's how much, Spielberg's putting into this movie. So the formal craft is insane. It's a really, really fun and impressive blockbuster. The same way I might say a silly superhero movie is, fun to watch. This is really fun to watch, but it's also really good to look at, and it looks amazing, which is something, I can't say for a lot of the Marvel movies. And, even the new Supergirl movie that's coming out, I haven't seen it, but just looking at the trailer, you're like, it looks like a typical superhero movie. This looks like an old-fashioned thriller with real practical sets and chases and everything. But I still have issues with the movie, so let's talk about that. The World War III subplot is undercooked to the point of being almost meaningless. Spielberg and Coeb background the alien action with the threat of global nuclear war, occasionally interrupting Daniel and Margaret's story with snippets from TV news reports where anchors toss off mentions of DEFCON 1 in North Korea. The issue is this movie uses World War III as a ticking clock, a functional device, and not much more. You never really feel the stakes of global nuclear war because the movie isn't actually interested in that. It's interested in the chase, which is fine. That's what people want to see. But you can't set your movie on the eve of World War III and then barely look at it. The world is on the verge of nuclear war over North Korea, but its backdrop, is given scant attention. It ends up feeling like a convenience rather than a dramatic pressure. And then there's the MacGuffin problem. The device, this alien rod thing that everyone is chasing, is deliberately inexplicable by design. Screenwriter David Coep said, if it had even one more power, it would be too much. It becomes the magic wand. I appreciate the restraint, but the problem is the movie still leans on it heavily. And when you're watching it, you feel the absence of logic. Why can Colin Firth's character use it if he wasn't one of the chosen ones? The film doesn't really answer that. Why haven't the aliens just come back to recover their people? The film shrugs. Disclosure Day asks you to think, but the plot kind of falls apart once you do. The ending itself, and I admire a lot of what Spielberg is going for, the broadcast of the world, the alien being wheeled out, Margaret saying listen and cutting to black, that's a bold choice, but getting there involves an exposition dump through news coverage, which is one of my least favorite devices in any movie. I hate exposition through news coverage. It works emotionally in the movie, but it's the most inelegant tool in the box. And I think the reveal that Daniel and Margaret were childhood abductees, while interesting, needed more runway. It comes late, it lands a little cheesy, and the film doesn't quite earn the weight it wants that moment to carry. Here's the thing about Disclosure Day that I keep coming back to. It is unmistakably a Spielberg movie in the best sense, and also a little dated in a way that only Spielberg could get away with. The whole film, hinges on getting stolen footage onto network television. That's an archaic, there's an archaic quaintness to that. In an era when anyone can post anything online in seconds, the film knows this. Daniel is clearly an Edward Snowden figure, and Spielberg is obviously aware that the internet exists, but he chose network television anyway because it's cinematic, because it gives the finale scale, because it's an event, and I get it. What I will say is when I watched this, I immediately clocked something. If any other director made this movie, it would be an HBO miniseries, 8 episodes, prestige TV, maybe really good. Spielberg might have produced this. But his presence is what makes it a film. He understands that cinema is communal, that you're in a room with hundreds of people experiencing something together, and that changes the texture of how a story lands. That's not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. This is not E.T. It's not Close Encounters, where Close Encounters was born out of 1970s Watergate paranoia, asking, is the government lying to us? Disclosure Day operates in a modern era of absolute cynicism, where the public already knows they're being lied to. That's an interesting creative shift. The Wonder has curdled into something more procedural, and Spielberg navigates that pretty well, even if the script doesn't always keep up with him. Spielberg is in his late 70s. He could make whatever he wants. And he's made, his West Side Story, his remake of a childhood classic. He made The Fabelmans about his childhood. All his movies were previously, that workaround, it was a workaround story about divorce. Same with Jaws and, the story about parents and all of his movies, Empire of the Sun. He can make whatever movie he wants, basically, but he chose to make a fun, earnest, formally rigorous Hollywood blockbuster about something he clearly believes in. There's something I find moving about that. The guy who made E.T. still believes in the possibility of something out there looking back at us, and he wants to share that with as many people as possible in the biggest room possible. Is it one of his best? No. Is it a really good movie that understands what a blockbuster should feel like at a fundamental level? Fuck yeah, absolutely. Disclosure Day is really solid. It's not a masterpiece, but I recommend seeing it in the biggest format you could find. So thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.